is our plan.
McKinsey Global Institute, and a senior partner at McKinsey and Company. So, Sven, I'll welcome you on stage. Okay, welcome on stage, Sven, and thank you for joining the summit. I wanted to dive right in with just sort of bouncing off some of the sessions we've had this morning. We just heard how the Draghi report, because of the way it was commissioned and the needs it sort of addresses, has become sort of super quickly adopted as a political program. Obviously, Ursula von der Leyen has made it a priority for her second mandate. But there is also a sense that 1 year in, maybe it's not being implemented as fast as a lot of people, particularly in industry, would like. What do you think is missing?
Thank you. I think it's, first of all, it's a privilege to be here and have this discussion. European competitiveness is in our hearts, I think, because we all care for Europe. That's why we're here. I would say that we should first still continue to celebrate that we actually have a common diagnostic and a common program, because we are debating execution. If you look at the movie back 5 years ago, we were actually debating whether it was an issue. And so now you get the large execution machines of Brussels, of the countries, of the last miles in countries, and so on. And the action is probably frustratingly slow because of the size of the system. And if I talk to CEOs all around the world, but also particularly in Europe, they are actually only asking execution questions, which is actually a miracle in and of itself, because Europe normally disagrees on everything. We now, for once, agree on the diagnostic, and we have, I think, most of the direction in one place. I take one metric on our progress, which is investment. Because basically investment is the money talks, and the money talks whether the opportunity in Europe is enough. And I think while we're spending a lot of time on regulation, we talk about energy and fragmentation and so on, we should just call it out that the reason why investment in Europe is lower is because the profitability in Europe is 300 basis points lower. And the metric that I would look at is the profitability in Europe going up so that companies actually have the incentive to invest? And all the stuff that we filter on execution should actually also be measured against that. And we just launched a report on foreign direct investment. You know, everybody thinks America is a mess, maybe it is. And the foreign direct investment is down. It's actually 4 times up in announcements. Maybe you take it with a grain of salt. But in Europe, it's not yet up. So my progress metric of investment, I'd like to see way more.
And I know today some industry leaders in Copenhagen have presented a sort of action, not reaction plan to some of the commissioners at the competitiveness summit there, promising to kind of up investment in Europe in return for some reforms. What kind of reforms are CEOs asking for?
I think it was said in an early part, I think Draghi said electricity price divide by 3, some countries divide by 4. If we don't get there, you could just forget about the rest, because we're basically deindustrializing on the back of a high energy price. Now, I see more shifts. Even the German action that happened over the last 3-4 weeks is quite radical, actually, on energy. If that would be levered up and also embraced in Europe, you would have at least one step. And I think most CEOs are just watching, do I see a real action? They don't trust the paperwork. And I just want to add one other dimension on this. I don't think a CEO can currently invest in the anticipation that in 3 years the big machine will have taken 60% out or 70% out of the right regulation and the energy prices down. A CEO invests in the here and now in a particular place. Now, the virtual place we talked about earlier was the 28th region, which might work for fintechs and so on to create one API across Europe. But the rest of investment is stuff in the ground, in a harbor in Rotterdam, in a semiconductor factory in Berlin, and so on. And when people make these investments, they need to actually match profitability of that investment with the opportunity of that investment. And I think the action will need to shift to that place, while in addition the large machine is waiting. But you will see investment only go up when on the ground the opportunities are in the money.
And can you give it some examples of what that would look like in practice?
So let me give you small stuff, and it's adding a little bit of regulatory change. East of Berlin, there's a semiconductor factory being built, supported by many companies, but also by Europe, which is in the right direction of the strategy of Draghi and everything else. But Germany somehow did not yet allow trucks to drive on Sunday. Well, if you take the Sunday out, you lose 1/7 of the revenue and way more of the profits. So for that factory, trucks are allowed to drive on Sunday. You might say that's just such a tiny little thing, but you will talk about it in the panel with ASML, the other partner here, later. What they are doing around Eindhoven, Veldhoven, with a project called Beethoven, is try to accelerate permitting, which is a nightmare. You actually want to invest 5 billion, and it will take you normally 8 years to get it done. But if you accelerate it, can you do it faster? I think Portugal has thought for the technology space, can we have a little bit of, they call it free zones, I don't care what the name is, but it's an investment zone or something, where the rules are a little bit already loosened, maybe in anticipation of the big rules changing, so that people can actually do stuff without lots of permitting. At universities, you see a lot of places where there's like 10 hectares and people can just do whatever they want without permission as long as it's safe. And then the innovation actually goes, because they will do hydrogen gas pipelines without having to sort out that it goes through the village. And I think we need to get the match of investment and opportunity and a bit of freedom at the local level. And if Europe would do 50 of those at 10 billion every few years, we would actually close most of the investment gap way ahead of the large changes.
So if we're talking about localized bespoke solutions for maybe specific sectors or even specific companies, how do you stop that becoming completely fragmented and creating an unlevel playing field throughout Europe, which is exactly the opposite, I guess, of what the European Union tries to achieve?
So the hope that I have is that when we actually do something, because the difference, whether the mindset in Europe will be, not just are we changing the paperwork, is stuff being dug up and being built. That's when Europe will wake up, European competitiveness is happening. All the paperwork will not get there. My hope is if we have 50 or 60 or 70 or 80 of these examples, big ones, like 10 billion investments, not small ones, everybody will look into them and say, we want more of that. And that actually, those projects that actually work consistent with the direction start to create an oil spill where everybody says, okay, why don't we just scale what's happening up there to Europe? So you get a little bit of, call it bottom-up pressure to the large system to actually do the right thing. But I'm very worried about the next 3 years, not about the next 10. In 10 years, the large regulations will have adjusted because the ship will be turned by the wall in a way and by the urgency. But in the next 3 years, how is somebody going to invest if they have to wait for what might happen?
And how do you ensure sort of oversight of this on making sure that this is in line with what's happening at an overall level and so on? Is it a role for the Commission? Is it very much just left to the local situation?
So when I go around talk to companies, I say, if you don't take the initiative, it's not going to come. So the initiative of what potential profitable investments is will have to be first, I would say, with the private sector. But then many of these initiatives needs permits, needs some regulatory change, needs some infrastructure change, needs all kinds of enabling factors, which are quite local, actually, in most cases. So then you need to bring from municipality to province to state to country together. And then I would say once something is mature enough that looks like a good investment, I would say Europe would say, if it's consistent within the swim lanes of Draghi and so on, but it has a little bit of curvature around it, I think Europe should weigh in and say yes. And if it's really far away, then Europe should maybe say, well, wait a minute, that's not what we intended. Now we're no longer heading towards a single market. And the scale of lots of local initiatives could actually outweigh the central initiative very quickly if the match between profitability and opportunity gets there.
And what are some of the trade-offs that you might need for this sort of industrial utopia?
Industrial utopia, okay. I thought it was just common sense industrial stuff, which is now if you want to build a factory, it should be profitable. I think the biggest bottlenecks are, I think there is this idea that money is short. It's not. Total investment in the world is up. It's just going to the place where the money can be made. And it's just like that. I'm an idealist. I love the food in Europe better, and many other things that are way better in Europe. Culture, democracy, it's all good. But at the end of the day, money goes to where it can be made. So the one thing we should give up and say, and by the way, the money is providing the pensions for the people, it's providing the taxes that pay all these good things. So let's just be in a place that we say, let these companies be able to do what they're doing, they will bring the money. Money is not the problem. I think we're over-rotating on how much money is the problem compared to the actual investment. And then it's permits, labor laws, and some other regulations, plus the energy price and the energy availability. If we would fix that, I think the money will start flowing very easily.
I guess some people might say that those things exist for a reason, the labour laws and the permitting and so on. Are there any examples of, thinking about a broader geopolitical context, any examples of elsewhere where this has happened and worked really successfully?
So, deregulation has been very hard. And we've done a study like at state level, because at country level deregulation, that's almost, there's too few examples of people working. There have been some US states, there have been some Asian provinces, but also countries that actually did real efforts at deregulation and including labor laws, while still having good level of protection. But the labor laws are not always protection. It's like a semiconductor factory cannot work economically if it's not 24/7. Just cannot. So then make a semiconductor factory 24/7 and ask the people whether they want to work there. So you shouldn't force people to a new regulation. If there are people that don't want to do 24/7, but a semiconductor facility will not be profitable if it's not loaded 24/7. So to me, you can have a trade-off where maybe there are two places you could work. But if somebody wants to do 24/7, gets paid for it, why would we not do it? And so I think we need to just be more pragmatic to say, how does this opportunity work? What is it competing with? And if we think semiconductors are strategic, or we think energy is strategic, or chemicals is strategic, or steel, we will have to solve that puzzle fits. And the competition comes from the world. And that against that puzzle, it has to fit too.
And at what stage of the innovation cycle is this going to be effective? Is it sort of more, presumably, it's not necessarily a startup scale, it's the viable operations that want to just increase operations and grow? This is at any scale. I think on the startup side, I'm actually much less worried about Europe. We have the talent, we have the entrepreneurship, we have the innovation. We had, I don't know how many nuclear fusion initiatives, but now they get a little bigger. They now get funded in the US, and they will actually build in the US rather than on average. So from there, there's a scaling bit, because we are quite fragmented in how we spend our money in Europe. That's one. But some of the projects that I look at that people are considering are 100 billion investment in a petrochemical industry that's not happening because the situation is just not right. Or a 30 billion investment in a large semiconductor facility that's not happening because the thing is not right. People would like to build nuclear. There's two things we need to change. Tail risk has to go to the government, and the permitting process has to go from 20 years to 4. And then the money will come. And so to me, it's not just the small stuff and then the next step. It's actually also very big stuff that's been hurdled by this and can be done, I think, better than where we are today. And I hope we can work at the Brussels level, let's call it that way, or the Europe level, and at the local level, because the action will actually be mostly local. And so on the non-local level, how do these fit in with the important projects of common European interest, these IPCEIs, the big sort of industrial policy tool of the Commission that is supporting these big cross-border industrial projects? Do you see them as complementary?
Yeah, they're complementary, because what I would expect, I think nobody is against the segments that have been picked up. Maybe there's one missing, or you like another more, and it should be a bit different. But these segments are roughly the right segments. So I would love if something then happens in semiconductors, or a certain segment of energy, or a certain segment of biotech that is consistent with the swim lanes of Europe, that then, when the teaming up happens, it also happens within that framework. And I think that can be happened. But if there's nobody locally promoting an investment, just sending money out of Brussels will not happen. I think you need to, I would love it to come together. And you see country initiatives, in particular smaller countries are trying to, create a little bit of coalitions to get scale in the total fishing of the pot that's there. But I hope the pot gets spent proportional to the right level of initiative. And then these swim lanes are the right swim lanes.
And we've only got a minute left, but I just want to say, what's the next sort of step? How would we go about implementing this idea? Who is responsible for actioning it?
So I'll just make this very personal, because I talked to many companies, and I basically say, if you don't take an initiative to propose a bold investment and then sort it with your local community, your local governments, and the different mechanisms in Europe, then that investment will not happen, and your choice is to go. And you will have some leaders that basically say, I don't have the time for that. And some leaders are actually stepping up. And I think we can collectively spend the time, talking about the big stuff on regulation, but if we don't collectively propose projects, then the projects won't be there that will benefit from whatever regulatory change that will happen. And so I'm out there, and by the way, I see it more and more happening. If you look through the lens, spot the people who are trying to do something and are done trying to work the mechanism, you actually see quite a lot of bright spots of people that are trying. And I think we should magnify that initiative.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all the time we have. Thank you to Sven Smit, who's the chair of the McKinsey Global Institute and a senior partner in McKinsey & Company. I'd like to ask the audience to stay seated. Our next session will start immediately after this one, and it's going to be moderated by Sarah Wheaton, who's Politico's chief policy correspondent, and she's going to lead a panel discussion on strategic autonomy. Thank you very much.